Sometimes the most precious things we own carry secrets we never knew existed. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who love us beyond measure. And sometimes, when we think we've lost everything, life has a way of bringing back what was always meant to be ours. This is the story of a necklace that traveled through decades of pain, a woman who never stopped believing in tomorrow, and a father whose heart never stopped searching for the daughter he lost. It's about the moments when destiny decides to rewrite the past and give second chances to hearts that have waited too long. What you're about to read will remind you that miracles don't always come wrapped in golden paper. Sometimes they come disguised as our darkest hour, when we're forced to let go of the last thing that connects us to hope. Sometimes the very act of losing everything becomes the key that unlocks the door to finding what we thought was gone forever. Get ready for a journey that will make you believe in the power of love that transcends time, the strength of a mother's heart, and the mysterious ways that life brings families back together when they need each other most. The fluorescent lights in the corner grocery store hummed with an annoying buzz that matched the tension building in Keisha Washington's chest. She stood in the dairy section, holding a gallon of milk while mentally calculating the contents of her worn leather wallet for the third time. $8.47. That was all that stood between her 3-year-old daughter Maya and another night of watered-down cereal. The milk cost $4.69. The loaf of bread she needed was $2.38. Simple math told her she was $1.60 short of feeding her daughter properly tonight. The weight of that mathematical reality pressed down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Keisha closed her eyes and took a deep breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over in public. She had promised herself years ago that she would never let anyone see her cry, especially not over money. Her grandmother had raised her to be stronger than that, to find solutions instead of drowning in problems. But, standing there in the cold glow of the dairy case, strength felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. At 28 years old, Keisha had already lived through more hardship than many people experience in a lifetime. The daughter of a teenage mother who had disappeared when Keisha was 5, she had been raised by her grandmother, Nana Rose, in a small apartment on the south side of Detroit. Nana Rose had been everything to her: mother, father, teacher, and best friend, all wrapped into one fierce, loving woman who worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. It was Nana Rose who had taught Keisha the value of hard work, the importance of education, and the power of never giving up, no matter how dark things seemed. She had also left Keisha the only inheritance that mattered, not money, which there wasn't any of, but something far more precious. A delicate gold necklace with a small pendant that caught the light like captured stars. The necklace now rested beneath Keisha's faded blue scrubs, its familiar weight against her chest a constant reminder of the woman who had shaped her into who she was. Nana Rose had worn it every single day of Keisha's childhood, and, in her final moments in the hospital bed, she had placed it around her granddaughter's neck with trembling fingers. "This was my mother's," Nana Rose had whispered, her voice barely audible above the beeping machines. "And her mother's before that. It's been in our family for generations. Promise me you'll keep it safe, baby girl. Promise me you'll pass it on to Maya someday." Keisha had made that promise without hesitation, clutching her grandmother's hand as the older woman slipped away peacefully. For 5 years, she had kept that promise religiously, wearing the necklace through community college, through her nursing assistant training, through the birth of her daughter, and through every struggle that followed. But now, standing in this grocery store with empty pockets and a hungry child at home, that promise felt like chains around her neck. The necklace that had once brought her comfort now seemed to mock her with its golden gleam. What good was a family heirloom if she couldn't feed her family? Maya was at home with Mrs. Chun, their elderly neighbor who watched her for free in exchange for Keisha helping with grocery shopping and doctor appointments. The little girl had already eaten the last of their food that morning, a bowl of oatmeal that Keisha had stretched with extra water to make it last longer. Tonight, there would be nothing unless Keisha found a solution fast. The job at Riverside Nursing Home had seemed like a blessing when she first got it 6 months ago. Steady hours, decent pay, and work that actually mattered. She loved taking care of the elderly residents, listening to their stories, and bringing small moments of joy to their days. But then, the facility had cut hours due to budget constraints, and her 40-hour weeks became 25-hour weeks. 25 hours wasn't enough to cover rent, utilities, food, and childcare, even with Maya going to free pre-K during the day. Keisha had applied for food assistance, but the paperwork was stuck somewhere in the system, and she couldn't wait for bureaucracy to save her daughter from hunger. She had swallowed her pride and asked for advances on her paychecks, but her supervisor had explained that company policy didn't allow it. She had even considered asking Mrs. Chin for a loan, but she knew the elderly woman lived on a fixed income and was struggling too. Every option had led to a dead end, except for one. The necklace. The thought made her stomach turn, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. Gold was valuable. Even a small piece could be worth enough to buy groceries, maybe even pay part of next month's rent. She had researched it online using the library's computer, learning about gold prices and jewelry dealers. The pendant looked old and well-crafted, the kind of piece that might actually have some value. But the thought of selling it felt like betraying everything Nana Rose had stood for, everything she had taught her about family and tradition and holding on to what mattered most. How could she even consider breaking the promise she had made to a dying woman? How could she explain to Maya someday that she had sold away 4 generations of family history for the price of milk and bread? The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, a certified nursing assistant who dedicated her days to caring for others, unable to provide basic care for her own child. The uniform she wore to work each day was a symbol of healing and compassion, but it couldn't heal the empty spaces in her refrigerator or show compassion for her mounting bills. Keisha opened her eyes and looked around the store, taking in the ordinary scene that felt anything but ordinary to her. A mother with 2 kids filling up a cart without looking at prices. A teenage boy buying energy drinks and candy with crumpled bills. An elderly man carefully comparing the costs of different brands of soup. Each person living in their own reality, dealing with their own version of normal. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Mrs. Chun asking what time she would be home. Maya had been asking for her all afternoon, the neighbor reported, and had cried when she realized Mommy wasn't coming back before dinner time. The message included a picture of Maya curled up on Mrs. Chin's couch, clutching the stuffed rabbit that had been her favorite since she was a baby. Looking at her daughter's face on the phone screen, Keisha felt something shift inside her chest. The gold chain around her neck suddenly felt heavier, but also somehow more solid, more real. Maya's future was more important than the past, wasn't it? Nana Rose had always said that family meant taking care of each other, no matter what. Maybe selling the necklace wasn't breaking a promise. Maybe it was fulfilling it in the only way she could. She thought about Nana Rose working those 3 jobs, sacrificing sleep and comfort and her own needs to make sure Keisha had what she needed. Would her grandmother really want her to let Maya go hungry just to preserve a piece of jewelry? Or would she want Keisha to do whatever it took to provide for her child, even if it meant letting go of the past? The answer came to her with startling clarity. Nana Rose had never cared about things, she had cared about people. The necklace was beautiful and meaningful, but it was just metal and stone. Maya was flesh and blood, laughter and dreams, the future of their family line. If preserving Maya's health and happiness meant sacrificing the necklace, then that was what love required. But even knowing that intellectually didn't make the decision easier emotionally. Her fingers moved unconsciously to her throat, touching the chain through her shirt. The pendant felt warm against her skin, warmed by her body heat, and 5 years of constant wear. Taking it off would feel like cutting away a part of herself. The store manager's voice came over the intercom, announcing that the store would be closing in 30 minutes. The sound jolted Keisha back to the present moment, to the milk growing warm in her hands, and the decision that couldn't be postponed any longer. She had to choose, the necklace or Maya's dinner, history or the future, the dead or the living. She put the milk and bread back and walked to the customer service counter, where a bored-looking teenager was scrolling through his phone. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Do you know if there are any jewelry stores still open this late in the area?" The kid looked up, surprised by the random question. There's Goldman's Jewelry on 5th Street. I think they're open until 8 on weekdays. What? Just wondering. Thank you. Goldman's Jewelry. She had walked past it 100 times on her way to and from work, always wondering who could afford the glittering displays in the windows. Now she was about to find out what it felt like to walk through those doors, not as a customer looking to buy, but as someone desperate enough to sell the most precious thing she owned. The walk to 5th Street took 15 minutes, 15 minutes during which Keisha's mind raced through every alternative she could think of. She could ask her supervisor one more time about the advance. She could see if any of her coworkers needed babysitting or cleaning help. She could donate plasma. She had heard you could make $50 doing that. But all of these options would take time, and Maya needed food tonight, not next week. Goldman's Jewelry sat between a dry cleaner and a cell phone repair shop, its windows glowing with warm light that made the jewelry inside sparkle like stars. Keisha had always imagined it as an intimidating place, full of wealthy customers and snooty employees. But, standing outside, it looked more ordinary than she had expected. Just a small business in a row of small businesses, with handwritten sale signs in the windows and a bell that chimed when she pushed open the door. The interior was smaller than she had imagined, cramped with glass display cases and lined with mirrors that made the space seem larger than it was. The smell of metal polish and leather hung in the air, mixed with something else, coffee, maybe, or aftershave. Behind the main counter, an older black man with graying hair and kind eyes looked up from something he was working on. "Good evening," he said, his voice warm and professional. "How can I help you tonight?" Keisha hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware of how she must look in her wrinkled scrubs and scuffed sneakers. But the man's expression remained kind, patient, as if he had all the time in the world and was genuinely interested in whatever had brought her to his store at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening. She started, then stopped, the words catching in her throat. "How did you begin a conversation like this? How did you explain that you were about to break a promise to a dead woman because you couldn't bear the thought of your living daughter going to bed hungry?" The jeweler seemed to sense her discomfort. He set down his tools and gave her his full attention, his expression shifting from professional politeness to genuine concern. "Take your time," he said gently. "Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." The jeweler picked up the necklace with the careful reverence of someone who understood the weight of what he held. His fingers moved with practiced expertise, turning the pendant to catch the light from different angles, examining the gold chain link by link. But Keisha noticed something else in his movements, a subtle tremor in his hands, a catch in his breath that seemed to go beyond professional interest. "This is beautiful work," he said softly, his voice carrying a note she couldn't quite identify. "Very old. The craftsmanship is exceptional." He looked up at her briefly, then back down at the necklace. "Do you know anything about its history? Where it came from originally?" Keisha shook her head, feeling suddenly embarrassed by how little she knew about her own family's past. "My grandmother never talked much about her family. She was born in Alabama, I think, but moved up north when she was young. She used to say the necklace was all she had left of her mother, but she never told me much more than that. I always meant to ask more questions, but—" She trailed off, the familiar ache of regret settling in her chest. The jeweler nodded understanding. "Family stories have a way of getting lost if we don't write them down. It's one of the great tragedies of our time." He reached under the counter and pulled out a jeweler's loupe, fitting it to his eye with practiced ease. "Let me take a closer look at the markings." As he examined the pendant under magnification, Keisha studied his face. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with skin the color of coffee with cream and hands that told the story of decades spent working with precious metals. There was something dignified about him, something that spoke of education and refinement, yet also of understanding the kind of hardship that brought people to his counter at closing time with desperate stories. The walls of his shop were lined with photographs, some professional shots of jewelry pieces, but others that looked more personal. Family portraits, graduation pictures, images of a younger version of himself standing proudly next to various storefronts over the years. One photo in particular caught her attention, a young woman holding a baby, both of them laughing at something off camera. The woman's smile was radiant, infectious, and Something about her face seemed familiar, though Keisha couldn't place why. The pendant is definitely gold, the jeweler said, pulling the loop away from his eye. 18 karat, which is quite high quality. The chain appears to be 14 karat, probably added later. You can tell by the difference in color when you look closely. He set the necklace down carefully, his movements deliberate and respectful. How much? Keisha started, then stopped, embarrassed by her own desperation. She had researched gold prices online, but seeing numbers on a screen was different from having someone evaluate your most precious possession and put a dollar amount on it. The gold content alone would be worth about $200 at current market prices, he said. But this piece has something more valuable than just its metal content. This style of pendant, this particular way of setting the small diamonds, it's not machine-made. This was crafted by hand, probably in the early 1900s. That makes it an antique, which adds significantly to its value. $200. The number hit Keisha like a physical blow. $200 would cover groceries for a month, maybe two if she shopped carefully. It would pay part of her rent. It might even give her enough breathing room to pick up extra shifts without worrying about childcare costs. The practical part of her mind began calculating immediately what bills she could pay, what food she could buy, how much stress would disappear from her life. But another part of her, the part that remembered Nana Rose's weathered hands clasping the chain around her neck, felt like she was drowning. $200 to sever the last connection she had to her grandmother's love, to 4 generations of women who had worn this necklace and passed it down with hope for the future. How did you put a price on that kind of legacy? The jeweler seemed to sense her internal struggle. I don't want to pressure you, he said gently. This is clearly a significant decision. Would you like to take some time to think about it? I could hold the necklace for you, give you a few days to consider your options. The kindness in his offer almost broke her resolve completely. When was the last time someone had shown her such consideration without wanting something in return? But Maya's face flashed through her mind again. Her daughter curled up on Mrs. Chen's couch, asking for mommy, not understanding why there wasn't any food in their refrigerator. No, Keisha said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. I need to do this today. Tonight. My daughter. She paused, struggling to explain without completely breaking down. She's only 3 years old, and she's hungry, and I don't have any other options. The jeweler's expression softened further, and something flickered across his features that looked almost like pain. A 3-year-old daughter, he repeated quietly. What's her name? Maya, Keisha said, wondering why he was asking but grateful for the chance to talk about the one bright spot in her life. Maya Rose Washington. I named her after my grandmother. Rose was Nana's first name. She watched something extraordinary happen to the jeweler's face. The color drained from his skin, his hands went completely still on the counter, and his eyes widened as if he had just seen a ghost. For a moment, he seemed to stop breathing entirely, his gaze fixed on some point beyond her shoulder. Washington, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Your last name is Washington. Yes, Keisha said, confused by his reaction. Why? Is something wrong? The jeweler shook his head as if trying to clear it, then looked back down at the necklace with an intensity that bordered on desperation. This pendant, he said, his voice shaking slightly. The design, the way the diamonds are set. I've seen this exact piece before. A chill ran down Keisha's spine. What do you mean? Where? Instead of answering directly, the jeweler walked to a filing cabinet behind the counter and pulled out a worn leather portfolio. His hands trembled as he flipped through pages of photographs, sketches, and what looked like old insurance documents. Finally, he found what he was looking for and placed a yellowed photograph on the counter beside the necklace. The photograph was old, probably from the 1960s based on the clothing and hairstyles, but it was clear enough to see the details. It showed a young black woman wearing the exact same necklace that now lay on the counter between them. The pendant caught the light in the photograph just as it did in real life, the small diamonds sparkling against her dark skin. The woman in the photo was smiling, but there was something sad in her eyes, something that suggested she had known more than her share of hardship. Keisha stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. That's my necklace. But how do you have a picture of it? Who is this woman? The jeweler's hands were shaking as he picked up the photograph. Her name was Diana Washington, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She came into my father's jewelry shop in 1967, just a few months before I took over the business. She was maybe 19 or 20 years old, and she was pregnant. The words hit Keisha like lightning. Diana Washington. The name meant nothing to her, but the timing, the necklace, the last name, it couldn't be a coincidence. Why did she come to the shop? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. She wanted to sell this necklace, the jeweler said. She said it was all she had left of her family, but she needed money. She was pregnant and alone, and her family had. He paused, looking for the right words. Her family had disowned her because of the baby's father. She had nowhere to go, no one to help her. Keisha's heart began pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The timeline was adding up in ways that made her dizzy. If this Diana Washington had been pregnant in 1967, the baby would have been born in 1967 or 1968. Her grandmother had always said she was born in 1968, but she had never known her exact birth date, and Nana Rose had always been vague about the details of her early life. What happened to her? Keisha asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. The jeweler set the photograph down with infinite care. My father bought the necklace from her. He gave her $300 for it, which was a lot of money in 1967. But he could see how much the piece meant to her, how much it hurt her to give it up. So he made her a promise. If she ever came back and wanted to buy it back, he would sell it to her for the same price he paid, regardless of how much time had passed or how much the gold was worth. Did she ever come back? No, the jeweler said sadly. My father kept the necklace in his personal collection for years, always hoping she would return. When he retired and I took over the business, he passed it on to me along with the same promise. I've been the caretaker of this piece for over 30 years, waiting for Diana Washington or her family to claim it. The room seemed to spin around Keisha. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself as the implications of what she was hearing crashed over her like a wave. You're saying that this necklace, my necklace, belonged to someone named Diana Washington who sold it to your father in 1967? I am, the jeweler said. And based on everything you've told me, your grandmother's first name, your last name, the timing of when she would have been born, I believe that Diana Washington was your great-grandmother, which would make this necklace something that belonged to my family already. Keisha finished, her voice barely a whisper. The jeweler nodded. Something that's been waiting to come home for over 50 years. Keisha stared at the necklace with new eyes, seeing not just the pretty pendant that Nana Rose had worn, but a piece of history that stretched back further than she had ever imagined. Her great-grandmother, a woman she had never known existed, had once stood in this very store, pregnant and desperate, making the same impossible choice between the past and the future that Keisha had come here to make tonight. There's something else, the jeweler said quietly. He reached into the portfolio again and pulled out a small piece of paper, yellowed with age. Diana left this when she sold the necklace. She said it was in case anyone ever came looking for her or the baby. With trembling hands, Keisha took the paper and unfolded it. Written in faded ink, in handwriting that was clearly educated but shaky with emotion, were just a few lines. My name is Diana Rose Washington. I was born in Selma, Alabama in 1947. I am selling this necklace to provide for my baby. If anything happens to me, and if my child ever comes looking for their family, please tell them that they come from a long line of strong women who never gave up, no matter how hard life got. Tell them that this necklace belonged to my mother, and her mother before that, and that it's meant to be passed down through the generations as a reminder that we are never truly alone. Tell them that I love them, even though I couldn't keep them. Tell them that they are my greatest treasure, worth more than all the gold in the world. Tears ran down Keisha's cheeks as she read the words, each sentence hitting her like a physical blow. This was her great-grandmother's voice, speaking to her across decades of silence, giving her a piece of the family history she had never known existed. Diana Rose Washington. Even their middle names were the same. She never came back for it, Keisha said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. What happened to her? The jeweler's expression grew even more somber. I don't know the whole story, but my father kept track of what he could. Diana Washington died in a car accident in 1969 when her baby would have been about 2 years old. The baby went to live with Diana's mother, a woman named Rose Washington who worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy family. Nana Rose, Keisha breathed. She never told me about her mother. She always said her parents died when she was very young, and she never talked about her childhood. I always thought she was just a private person, but now you know she was protecting herself from painful memories, the jeweler finished. And protecting you from a family history that was probably too complicated and heartbreaking to explain to a child. Keisha looked down at the necklace again, understanding now why it had always felt like more than just jewelry to her. It wasn't just her grandmother's necklace. It was a family heirloom that had survived poverty, teenage pregnancy, family rejection, tragedy, and decades of separation. It had been waiting in this store for over 50 years for someone from Diana's family to come and claim it. And now here she was, Diana's great-granddaughter, preparing to sell it again because she was in the exact same situation Diana had been in, desperate, alone, and willing to sacrifice anything for her child's well-being. The parallel was so perfect it took her breath away. But this time, the story could have a different ending. Keisha couldn't stop staring at the money on the counter, her mind reeling from everything she had learned in the past 30 minutes. The kindness of this stranger, the miraculous discovery of her family history, the impossible coincidence that had brought her to this exact store on this exact night. It was too much to process all at once. "I don't understand why you would help me like this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I walked in here as a complete stranger, and you're treating me like family." Something flickered across the jeweler's face at her words, an expression so brief she almost missed it. He cleared his throat and busied himself putting away the photographs, but his movements seemed suddenly awkward, as if he was buying time to think. "Sometimes the universe puts people in our path for a reason," he said finally, not meeting her eyes. "Your great-grandmother touched my father's life in a profound way. He talked about her for years, worried about what happened to her and her baby. Helping you feels like completing something that was left unfinished." Keisha picked up the money with trembling hands, still hardly believing that her crisis had been resolved so unexpectedly. "I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I can. I'll get extra shifts. I'll do whatever it takes." "There's no rush," the jeweler said. "Take care of your daughter first. Everything else can wait." He paused, then asked with careful casualness, "What did you say her name was again?" Maya Rose Washington," Keisha repeated, fastening the necklace back around her neck. The familiar weight against her chest felt different now, heavier with history and meaning. "She's 3 years old, and she's the light of my life. I would do anything for her, sacrifice anything." "Of course you would," the jeweler said softly. "That's what parents do. We'd move mountains for our children if we could." Again, that strange expression crossed his face, and he turned away to straighten some items on a shelf that didn't need straightening. As Keisha folded the money and put it safely in her wallet, her eyes wandered back to the family photographs on the wall. Now that she wasn't consumed with desperation, she could study them more carefully. Most showed the jeweler at different stages of his life: graduation photos, business milestones, family gatherings. But one photograph in particular drew her attention, a casual snapshot that seemed out of place among the more formal portraits. It showed a much younger version of the jeweler, probably in his early 20s, standing with his arm around a young black woman. Both of them were smiling broadly, the kind of genuine, unguarded smiles that only happened between people who truly cared about each other. The woman was wearing a simple summer dress, and her hair was styled in the natural afro that had been popular in the late 1960s. There was something achingly familiar about her face, something that made Keisha's heart skip a beat. "That's a beautiful photograph," she said, nodding toward the image. "Who's the woman with you?" The jeweler followed her gaze, and she watched his entire body tense. For a moment, he seemed frozen, as if the simple question had transported him back in time to that moment captured in the photograph. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. That's someone I knew a long time ago. Someone very important to me." Keisha studied the photograph more closely, and something cold began to spread through her chest. The woman's face, the timing of the photograph, The way the jeweler's expression had changed when she asked about it. Pieces of a puzzle were starting to fall into place, creating a picture she wasn't sure she was ready to see. "She's beautiful," Keisha said carefully. "You two look very happy together. What was her name?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and buried pain. The jeweler stared at the photograph as if he were seeing a ghost, his hands gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles turned white. "Diana," he said finally, the word barely audible. Her name was Diana Washington. The world tilted sideways. Keisha grabbed the counter for support as the implications hit her like a physical blow. The jeweler in the photograph wasn't just someone who had known her great-grandmother. He was someone who had been important to her, someone she had cared about deeply. The joy in their faces spoke of love, real love, the kind that changes your whole world. "You knew my great-grandmother," Keisha said, her voice tight with shock. "You actually knew her, personally." The jeweler nodded slowly, still staring at the photograph. "I more than knew her," he said. "I loved her. I loved her more than I had ever loved anyone, more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "What happened? Why did she have to sell the necklace? Where were you when she needed help?" The questions poured out of Keisha before she could stop them, 56 years of family mystery demanding answers. The jeweler flinched at each question as if they were physical blows, but he didn't turn away from the photograph. "I was young and stupid and scared," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "When Diana told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I was 22 years old, still learning the jewelry business from my father. And I had these dreams of traveling the world, of becoming more than just a small-town jeweler. The idea of being responsible for a baby, for a family, it terrified me." Keisha felt sick. "You abandoned her." "Not intentionally," the jeweler said quickly, finally, turning to face her. "I asked her to wait for me. I told her I needed time to figure things out, to get my life in order, to become the man she deserved. I said I would come back for her, that we would get married and raise our child together. I meant it when I said it. I really thought I would come back. But you didn't. I got scared. The more time passed, the more terrified I became. What if I wasn't ready? What if I failed her and the baby? What if I turned out to be a terrible father, like my own father had been to me?" He shook his head, lost in memories. "I convinced myself that she and the baby would be better off without me, that someone else would come along who could give them the stability and security I wasn't sure I could provide. So you just left her to handle it alone." "I told myself it was temporary. I thought if I could just get established, make some money, prove to myself that I was capable of taking care of a family, then I would go back. But months turned into years, and by the time I worked up the courage to look for her..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "By the time you looked for her, she was dead," Keisha finished coldly. The jeweler's shoulders sagged as if the weight of decades of guilt had finally become too much to bear. "I found out about the accident 3 years too late. When I went looking for her in 1972, I learned that she had died in 1969. I also learned that she had sold her most precious possession, the necklace her grandmother had given her, just to survive after I abandoned her." Keisha stared at him, trying to reconcile the kind man who had just helped her with the coward who had abandoned her great-grandmother in her darkest hour. "And the baby? Did you look for the baby?" "I tried," he said desperately. "God help me, I tried. But Diana's mother, Rose, had moved somewhere up north with the child. Nobody in Alabama knew where they had gone. And this was before the internet, before it was easy to track people down. I hired a private investigator, but we never found them." "My grandmother," Keisha said quietly. "Nana Rose. You were looking for my grandmother." The jeweler nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I looked for years. Every time someone came into the shop with the last name Washington, I wondered if it could be them. Every time I saw a young black woman who looked like Diana, my heart would stop for a moment. I never stopped hoping that someday, somehow, I would find them and have the chance to make things right." A terrible suspicion was growing in Keisha's mind, a possibility so enormous and life-changing that she was afraid to voice it. But the pieces were all there, spread out before her like a completed jigsaw puzzle. The timing of Diana's pregnancy, the jeweler's desperate search for the baby, his extreme kindness to a stranger who had walked into his shop. "What was the baby's name?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Diana's baby. Did you know what she named him, or her? The jeweler's face crumpled with fresh pain. I found that out years later, from one of Diana's cousins who still lived in Selma. She said Diana had named the baby after her mother, Rose Washington. She said Diana had hoped that giving the baby her mother's name would convince Rose to take her in and raise her. Her, Keisha repeated, the word hitting her like lightning. The baby was a girl. Yes, a little girl born in January of 1968. The room spun around Keisha as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. January 1968. Nana Rose had always been vague about her exact birth date. But she had mentioned once that she was born during the coldest January Detroit had seen in years. A January baby named Rose Washington, raised by her grandmother after her teenage mother died in a car accident. The jeweler was staring at her now with growing comprehension, as if he too was putting together the same impossible puzzle. Your grandmother, he said slowly. Rose Washington. How old was she when she died? 57, Keisha whispered. She died 5 years ago, when she was 57 years old. They stared at each other across the counter, both of them doing the same math, both arriving at the same stunning conclusion. If Diana's baby had been born in January 1968, she would have been 57 years old when she died in 2019. My God, the jeweler breathed, sinking into a chair behind the counter. Rose Washington. Your grandmother was named Rose Washington, and she was born in 1968 to a teenage mother who died in a car accident. Keisha's legs gave out, and she had to grip the counter to keep from falling. The man standing before her wasn't just someone who had known her great-grandmother. He wasn't just a kind stranger who had helped her in her moment of need. He was the father Diana had been carrying when she sold the necklace. The man who had abandoned her great-grandmother was the father of her grandmother, which meant, "You're my great-grandfather," she said, the words sounding surreal even as she spoke them. "You're Maya's great-great-grandfather." The jeweler, her great-grandfather, stared at her with wonder and heartbreak warring in his eyes. "My granddaughter," he said softly. "You're my granddaughter. And Maya, your daughter, she's my great-granddaughter." The weight of 3 generations of loss and separation crashed over them both. All those years of Nana Rose's silence about her family, all those questions Keisha had wanted to ask but never did, all those times she had wondered about her heritage and where she came from, the answers had been waiting here all along. In a jewelry store she had walked past 100 times without knowing it held the key to her entire family history. She never knew, Keisha said, tears streaming down her face. Nana Rose lived her whole life never knowing that her father was looking for her, that he regretted leaving, that he loved her. And I lived my whole life not knowing I had a granddaughter, the jeweler said, his voice breaking. Not knowing that the little girl I had been searching for had grown up to be a strong, beautiful woman who raised a daughter of her own. Not knowing that my family had been right here, in the same city, all along. They stood there in silence, separated by a counter full of jewelry but connected by bonds of blood and loss that stretched back over 50 years. The necklace around Keisha's neck seemed to pulse with warmth, as if it too understood that its long journey was finally complete. But even as the miracle of their reunion settled over them, Keisha couldn't forget the pain her family had endured because of his choice to leave. Nana Rose's struggles as a single mother, the silence about their family history, the poverty and hardship that had shaped every generation since Diana's death. All of it could be traced back to this man's decision to abandon the woman he claimed to love. "I'm glad I finally found you," she said carefully. "But I need you to understand something. The choice you made, to leave Diana when she needed you most, it affected more than just her. It affected my grandmother, and it affected me, and it's affecting Maya. We've all grown up without knowing where we came from, without having the security and support that family should provide." The silence in the jewelry store stretched like a taut wire, filled with 56 years of unspoken words and unanswered questions. Keisha stared at the man across the counter, trying to reconcile the kind stranger who had just saved her from desperation with the grandfather she had never known existed, the man whose abandonment had shaped her entire family's history. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Your real name. I've been standing in your store for an hour, and I don't even know what to call you." The jeweler straightened his shoulders, as if preparing to face a judgment he had long known was coming. Marcus Goldman, he said. My full name is Marcus Samuel Goldman. My father, Samuel Goldman, opened this store in 1952. I took over when he retired in 1968. Goldman, Keisha repeated. Jewish. Half African American, Marcus said. My father was a Jewish immigrant from Poland who came here in the 1930s. My mother was a black woman from Mississippi who moved north during the war. They met when she was working as a seamstress in his first shop. It was complicated, being a biracial family in the 1940s and 50s. We faced discrimination from all sides. Keisha could hear the pain in his voice, the weight of a lifetime spent navigating identity in a world that didn't have space for people who didn't fit into neat categories. Is that why you were scared? When Diana got pregnant? Because you knew how hard it would be for a mixed-race child? Marcus nodded slowly. Partly. But mostly I was just scared of responsibility. Of failing. Of becoming like my own father, who worked 18-hour days and barely spoke to his family. He paused, studying her face. You look like her, you know. Like Diana. The same eyes, the same way of tilting your head when you're thinking. When you walked into my store tonight, something about you reminded me of her. But I never imagined. Tell me about her, Keisha said, sitting down in the chair across from his counter. Tell me about my great-grandmother. What was she really like? Marcus's expression softened, and, for a moment, the years seemed to fall away from his face. She was extraordinary. Beautiful, yes, but more than that. She was intelligent, funny, passionate about social justice. She wanted to be a teacher, planned to go to college, and help kids in underserved communities. She used to say that education was the only way to break the cycle of poverty and discrimination. What happened to those dreams when she got pregnant? They died, Marcus said bluntly. Her family was deeply religious, very traditional. When they found out she was pregnant and unmarried, they cut her off completely. Her father said she had brought shame on the family name. Her mother wanted to help, but she was too afraid of her husband to defy him openly. Keisha felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same grief she had carried for years about her grandmother's silence regarding their family history. So she lost everything. Her family, her dreams, her future, all because she fell in love with someone who wasn't strong enough to stand by her. The words hit Marcus like physical blows, and she could see him flinch with each accusation. But he didn't try to defend himself or make excuses. He just sat there and absorbed her anger, as if he believed he deserved every bit of it. You're right, he said quietly. I destroyed her life. I was selfish and cowardly, and I let my fear make choices that hurt the person I loved most in the world. There's no excuse for what I did, no way to justify abandoning her when she needed me. And yet you kept that photograph all these years, Keisha observed, glancing back at the picture on the wall. You built a shrine to your guilt and called it remembrance. Marcus followed her gaze to the photograph. I kept it to remind myself of what I had lost, what I had thrown away because I was too immature to recognize how precious it was. Every day for 56 years, I've looked at that picture and asked myself how my life would have been different if I had been brave enough to stay. How would it have been different? Keisha asked, genuinely curious despite her anger. I would have married Diana, Marcus said without hesitation. We would have raised Rose together, given her a stable home with two parents who loved her. I would have supported Diana's dreams of becoming a teacher, helped her go to college while I took care of the baby. We would have built a life together, a family together. But you didn't want that life, Keisha pointed out. You said yourself that you had dreams of traveling the world, of being more than just a small-town jeweler. I was 22 years old and thought I knew everything, Marcus said with bitter regret. I thought adventure and freedom were more important than love and family. I thought there would always be time later to settle down, that opportunities like Diana would come along again. I was an idiot. Keisha studied his face, looking for signs of deception or self-serving revision of history. But all she saw was genuine remorse. Did you ever marry? Have other children? Marcus shook his head. I tried a few times. But I could never commit fully to anyone else because part of my heart always belonged to Diana and the daughter I had never met. Every relationship ended the same way, with women telling me that I was emotionally unavailable, that I was holding back some essential part of myself. You were, Keisha said bluntly, because you knew you had unfinished business. You knew you had a daughter out there somewhere who might need you. I told myself I was protecting my future relationships by not burdening them with my past mistakes, Marcus said. But, really, I was just compounding those mistakes. I let my guilt about abandoning one family prevent me from ever creating another one. The weight of his loneliness settled over the conversation like a heavy blanket. Keisha tried to imagine living with that level of regret for over 5 decades. Waking up every day knowing that your moment of cowardice had cost you the most important relationships of your life. What about the necklace? She asked. Why did your father really keep it? It couldn't have been worth that much money to him. Marcus smiled sadly. You're right, it wasn't about the money. Diana made such an impression on my father that day. She was so young, so desperate, but she carried herself with such dignity. When she told him the story about the necklace being passed down through generations of strong women, it broke his heart to see her forced to sell it. But he bought it anyway. He said later that he realized she was going to sell it somewhere, with or without his help. At least if he bought it, he could ensure it was treated with respect and kept safe. And he could make that promise about letting her buy it back, which gave her hope that the loss might not be permanent. Keisha touched the necklace through her shirt, thinking about all the hands it had passed through, all the stories it had witnessed. Did he tell you about her when you took over the business? He told me about a young pregnant woman who had sold a beautiful antique necklace, and he made me promise to honor his agreement if she ever came back. But he didn't mention her name, and I didn't realize who she was until years later when I started actively looking for Diana and asking around Selma about her family. When you found out, why didn't you try harder to find my grandmother? You had resources, money. You could have hired better investigators. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. Because I was afraid, he admitted finally. I was afraid of what I would find. What if Rose hated me for abandoning her mother? What if she was struggling financially, and I could have helped but had waited too long? What if she had needed a father growing up, and I had failed her the same way I failed Diana? So instead of risking rejection, you just gave up. I told myself I was respecting their privacy, that they had built a life without me and I had no right to disrupt it. But, you're right, I gave up. I let my fear of facing the consequences of my choices prevent me from even trying to make things right. Keisha felt a complicated mixture of anger and pity looking at him. This man had shaped her family's history through his absence, and now she was seeing the cost that absence had exacted on him as well. He had paid for his cowardice with a lifetime of loneliness and regret. But that didn't erase the price her family had paid. My grandmother struggled her entire life, she said quietly. She worked 3 jobs to put food on the table and clothes on my back. She never got to go to college, never got to pursue her own dreams because she was too busy trying to survive and raise me. She died exhausted and worn out at 57 years old, and she never even knew that her father had been looking for her. Tears streamed down Marcus's face as he absorbed the reality of his daughter's life. I failed her, he whispered. I failed both of them, Diana and Rose. I let my selfishness rob them of the support and stability they deserved. And what about me? Keisha asked, her voice rising with years of suppressed pain. I grew up not knowing anything about my family history, not understanding where I came from or who I was supposed to be. I had no male role models, no grandfather to teach me about my heritage or give me guidance. I raised myself on determination and stubbornness because that's all I had. I'm sorry, Marcus said, the words inadequate but heartfelt. I'm so deeply sorry for all the pain my choices caused. I know I can't change the past, can't undo 56 years of absence and neglect. But if you'll let me, I want to try to be part of your life now, part of Maya's life. Keisha looked at him through her tears, this broken man who had finally found what he had been searching for his entire adult life. Part of her wanted to walk away, to let him live with his regret just as her family had lived with his absence. But another part of her, the part that thought about Maya growing up with questions about her family history, the part that remembered how much she had longed for a grandfather as a child, wanted to give him the chance he had never given himself. I don't know if I can trust you, she said honestly. How do I know you won't get scared again and disappear when things get difficult. How do I know you're ready for the reality of being part of a family, especially a family that's dealing with real problems like poverty and single parenthood? Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense and sincere. Because I've had 56 years to grow up. Because I've lived with the consequences of cowardice, and I never want to feel that kind of regret again. Because finding you and Maya isn't just a second chance. It's the answer to every prayer I've said for over half a century. Pretty words, Keisha said. But, Maya and I need more than words. We need reliability, consistency, someone who will be there when things get tough. Can you be that person? I want to try, Marcus said. I want to learn how to be the grandfather I should have been all along. I want to help you build a stable life for Maya. I want to tell her stories about her great-great-grandmother Diana, and about the strength that runs in her bloodline. I want to make sure she never has to wonder where she comes from the way you did. Keisha sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered and what was being asked of her. In the space of 2 hours, her entire understanding of her family and her place in the world had been turned upside down. She had come here to sell her most precious possession to feed her daughter, and instead she had discovered a grandfather she never knew existed and been offered a chance at the family connection she had always craved. But accepting that offer meant taking a leap of faith with a man who had already proven once that he could disappear when life got complicated. It meant risking Maya's heart and her own on someone whose track record with family responsibility was deeply flawed. I need time to think about this, she said finally. I need to process everything that's happened tonight, figure out what's best for Maya and me. This is too big a decision to make in the heat of the moment. Marcus nodded, though she could see the fear in his eyes, fear that if she left now, she might never come back, just as his daughter had never come back all those years ago. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need. But, please, please don't disappear. Don't let my past mistakes cost us this chance to be a family. Keisha stood up, clutching her purse with the money he had given her, the money that would feed Maya tonight, and for many nights to come. I won't disappear, she said. But I can't promise anything more than that right now. As she walked toward the door, Marcus called out behind her. Keisha, what's the best way to reach you? I don't want to be pushy, but could I at least have your phone number? She turned back to look at him. This man who was a straw. 3 weeks passed before Keisha found the courage to pick up the phone. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, of staring at Marcus's phone number until the ink seemed to blur, of watching Maya play and wondering what kind of future she wanted to build for her daughter. The money Marcus had given her had solved their immediate crisis, allowing her to buy groceries, pay bills, and even pick up a few small things for Maya that had been on her wish list for months. But more than the financial relief, it was the knowledge that they weren't truly alone in the world that kept Keisha awake at night. During those 3 weeks, Marcus had kept his word about not being pushy. He hadn't shown up at her apartment or her workplace. He hadn't tried to track her down or force a conversation. But he had found other ways to reach out, small gestures that showed he was thinking about them without crossing the boundaries she had set. A children's book about family trees had appeared on her doorstep with a note. For Maya, when you're ready to tell her story. A bag of groceries had been left with Mrs. Chun, along with enough money to cover Maya's daycare for a month, and a message, no strings attached. Just a grandfather trying to help. Fresh flowers had appeared at Nana Rose's graveside, accompanied by a letter addressed to the grandmother he had never been able to apologize to in life. Each gesture chipped away at Keisha's walls, not because they were grand or expensive, but because they showed consistency, thoughtfulness, and respect for her need for space. They showed a man who had learned patience through decades of regret, who was willing to prove himself slowly rather than demanding immediate forgiveness. The call came on a Tuesday evening while Maya was having her bath, splashing happily in the tub, and singing a song she had learned at preschool. Keisha sat on her bed, staring at the phone, before finally dialing the number she had memorized. Marcus answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting by the phone for weeks. Hello. It's Keisha, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The relief in his voice was palpable. Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure. I hoped you would, but I wasn't sure. I've been thinking about everything you said. About what you want, what you're offering. And I've been thinking about what's best for Maya. And what did you decide? Keisha took a deep breath. I want to try. Not everything at once. Not jumping into some fantasy where we're suddenly a perfect family. But I want to try letting you be part of our lives. See if you can really be the man you say you want to be. Marcus was quiet for so long that Keisha wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. What do you need from me? How do you want to start? Slow, Keisha said firmly. We start very slow. Maybe coffee, just you and me, so we can talk without Maya getting confused if this doesn't work out. Then, if things go well, maybe Maya can meet you. But, as a friend first, not as family. She's only 3 years old, and I won't have her heart broken if you decide this is too hard. I understand completely. Whatever timeline you're comfortable with, whatever boundaries you need to set, I'll follow your lead. They met the following Saturday at a small diner near Keisha's apartment, one of those old-school places with vinyl booths and coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. Marcus arrived early and was already sitting in a corner booth when Keisha walked in, looking nervous but determined. Seeing him in daylight, in casual clothes rather than his work attire, Keisha could see the family resemblance more clearly. He had Nana Rose's eyes, the same warm brown that Maya had inherited. His hands moved when he talked, the same way her grandmother's had, and he had a habit of tilting his head when he was thinking that reminded Keisha of her own mannerisms. You look like her, Keisha said as she sat down across from him. Like my grandmother. I can see it now. Marcus smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Diana used to say that Rose had my eyes. She would hold the baby and say she was looking at a little girl version of me. Tell me more about that time. About when Diana was pregnant, before you left. What was it really like? Over coffee and pie that neither of them touched, Marcus painted a picture of a love story that had been both beautiful and doomed. He told her about long walks by the river where Diana would share her dreams of becoming a teacher, about quiet evenings when they would plan the future they thought they would have together. He told her about Diana's fierce intelligence, her passion for civil rights, her determination to make the world better for their child. She would have been an incredible mother, Marcus said. She had this way of seeing the best in people, of believing that everyone could be better than they were. She saw potential in me that I couldn't see in myself. And you let that potential die with her, Keisha said, not unkindly but honestly. Marcus nodded. I did. And I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to honor the man she believed I could be. Over the following weeks, their coffee meetings became regular Saturday morning appointments. Keisha found herself looking forward to these conversations, not just because they filled in gaps in her family history, but because Marcus was genuinely interesting company. He was well-read, thoughtful, and had a dry sense of humor that reminded her of Nana Rose. He asked about her work, her dreams, her challenges as a single mother, and he listened to her answers with the kind of attention that made her feel heard and valued. Slowly, she began to share more personal things. Her struggles in nursing school, her fears about raising Maya alone, her dreams of maybe going back to school someday to become a full nurse practitioner. Marcus listened without judgment, offered advice when asked, and sometimes just sat in comfortable silence when she needed to process difficult emotions. I want to meet her, Marcus said during their 5th coffee meeting. I want to meet my great-granddaughter. Keisha had been expecting this request, preparing for it, but it still made her stomach clench with anxiety. Are you sure you're ready? Meeting a 3-year-old isn't like having coffee with an adult. She's energetic and loud and completely unpredictable. She might love you immediately or decide she doesn't like you for no reason at all. I raised my nephew for a year when my sister was going through her divorce, Marcus said. I'm not completely inexperienced with children. And Keisha, I've been waiting to meet this little girl for 3 years without even knowing she existed. I'm ready. The meeting was arranged for the following Sunday at the park near Keisha's apartment, neutral territory where Maya would be comfortable and Marcus could make a natural exit if things went badly. Keisha spent the morning explaining to Maya that they were going to meet a friend of Mommy's, someone who had known their family a long time ago. Maya, with the easy acceptance of childhood, seemed more interested in the promise of playground time than in meeting another adult. She was wearing her favorite dress, the one with butterflies that spun when she twirled, and had insisted on bringing her stuffed rabbit for security. Marcus was already at the park when they arrived, sitting on a bench near the playground with a small gift bag beside him. He stood when he saw them approaching, and Keisha watched his face transform as he got his first glimpse of Maya in person. "She's perfect," he breathed, tears immediately springing to his eyes. "She looks just like Diana at that age. The same curls, the same bright eyes." Maya hung back behind Keisha's legs, suddenly, shy in the presence of this stranger who was staring at her with such intensity. But Marcus seemed to understand her hesitation. He sat back down on the bench, making himself less imposing, and waited for her to come to him. "You must be Maya," he said gently. "Your mommy told me you like butterflies." Maya peeked out from behind Keisha, interested despite her shyness. "How did you know?" "Because you're wearing a beautiful butterfly dress, and because I brought you something that I thought you might like." He held up the gift bag, but didn't move toward her. "Would you like to see?" With the natural curiosity of childhood overcoming her initial wariness, Maya stepped forward to investigate. Inside the gift bag was a delicate butterfly hair clip, made of colorful enamel and small crystals that caught the light like tiny rainbows. "It's beautiful," Maya exclaimed, her shyness forgotten in her excitement over the unexpected gift. "Mommy, look how pretty it is." "It is beautiful," Keisha agreed, catching Marcus's eye over Maya's head. "What do you say to Mr. Marcus?" "Thank you, Mr. Marcus," Maya said solemnly, then immediately brightened. "Can you put it in my hair?" For the next hour, Keisha watched her daughter charm her great-great-grandfather without even trying. Maya showed him how high she could swing, demonstrated her mastery of the monkey bars, and insisted he watch her go down the slide approximately 47 times. Marcus proved to be a natural with children, patient and enthusiastic about Maya's accomplishments, quick to offer comfort when she scraped her knee on the sidewalk. But the moment that broke Keisha's heart completely came when Maya, tired from all her playground adventures, climbed up onto Marcus's lap and asked him to tell her a story. "What kind of story would you like?" Marcus asked, unconsciously adjusting his arms to make a more comfortable seat for the little girl. "A princess story," Maya said decisively. "But not the kind where she gets rescued. The kind where she does the rescuing." Marcus smiled. "I think I know just the story. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess named Diana who had a magic necklace that had been passed down through generations of brave women." Keisha listened as Marcus wove together the true story of their family into a fairy tale appropriate for a 3-year-old. In his version, Diana was a princess who used her magic necklace to protect people who had to give up her treasure temporarily to save her kingdom, but whose love was so strong that it guided the necklace back to her family years later when they needed it most. "And what happened to Princess Diana?" Maya asked when the story was finished. "She went to live in the stars," Marcus said gently. "But her love stayed behind to watch over her family. And the magic necklace found its way back to where it belonged, with her granddaughter and great-granddaughter, who were brave and strong just like she was." Maya considered this seriously. "Is that a true story?" Marcus looked at Keisha, asking permission with his eyes. At her nod, he said, "The most important parts are true. The parts about love and family and magic necklaces that keep us connected to the people who came before us." From that day forward, Marcus became a regular part of their lives. Not as a replacement for the family structure they had built, but as an addition that made their small world larger and richer. He picked up Maya from daycare when Keisha had to work late shifts. He took them to museums and parks and ice cream shops, creating new memories while sharing old stories. He helped with homework and bedtime stories and the 1,000 small tasks that came with raising a child. But more than the practical help, Marcus brought something to their lives that Keisha hadn't realized they were missing, a sense of rootedness, of belonging to something larger than just themselves. He told Maya stories about her great-great-grandmother Diana's dreams of becoming a teacher, about the strong women who had worn the necklace before her, about the family history that stretched back through generations of survivors and dreamers. For Keisha, having Marcus in their lives meant more than just emotional support. His generosity allowed her to cut back on her hours at the nursing home and enroll in evening classes to complete her nursing degree. He insisted on paying for her textbooks and tuition, calling it an investment in the family's future rather than charity. Diana wanted to be a teacher, he said when Keisha protested his financial help. Let me help you achieve your dreams the way I should have helped her achieve hers. The changes in their lives were gradual, but profound. Maya flourished with the additional attention and stability. Keisha felt the constant weight of financial stress lifting from her shoulders, replaced by the confidence that came from knowing she wasn't facing life's challenges completely alone. And Marcus seemed to grow younger and more vibrant with each passing month, as if having family to care for had given him a renewed sense of purpose. 1 year after their first meeting in the jewelry store, Marcus asked Keisha and Maya to join him for a special dinner at his apartment above the shop. When they arrived, they found the table set with his finest dishes and a feast that was clearly homemade with love. What's the occasion? Keisha asked, settling Maya into a booster seat that Marcus had bought specifically for their visits. It's an anniversary, Marcus said, pouring grape juice into Maya's special cup. 1 year ago today, a young woman walked into my shop to sell a necklace and changed my life forever. After dinner, Marcus disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a small velvet box. I have something for you, Maya. Something that belongs to you. Inside the box was a delicate gold bracelet, clearly made by the same craftsman who had created the original necklace. The design complemented the necklace perfectly, but it was sized for a child's wrist. I had this made for you, Marcus explained as he helped Maya put on the bracelet. It's made from some of the gold your great-great-grandmother Diana left with the necklace all those years ago. She always wanted her baby to have something from the family, and now her great-great-granddaughter does. Maya held up her arm to admire the bracelet, delighted by how it caught the light. It matches Mommy's necklace. That's right, Marcus said. And when you're older, the necklace will be yours too. But, for now, this bracelet will remind you that you come from a long line of strong women who never gave up, no matter how hard life got. Keisha touched her own necklace, thinking about the journey it had taken to find its way home. From Diana to Nana Rose to herself, and someday to Maya, it would continue to be passed down through the generations, carrying with it the stories and love of all the women who had worn it. Thank you, she said to Marcus, and the words carried the weight of everything they had been through together. For everything. For finding us, for not giving up on us, for becoming the family we always needed. Marcus smiled, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you for giving me the chance to be the man Diana always believed I could be. Thank you for letting me be a grandfather. As they sat around the dinner table, 3 generations finally, together, the necklace seemed to pulse with warmth against Keisha's chest. It had traveled through poverty and separation, through loss and abandonment, through decades of searching and waiting. But, like the love that bound their family together, it had endured. It had found its way home, carrying with it the promise that no matter how dark things might seem, love has a way of bringing families back together when they need each other most. Outside the jewelry store, the lights of the city sparkled like stars, full of promise and possibility. Inside, a grandfather read bedtime stories to his great-granddaughter while her mother cleaned dishes and hummed the lullabies her own grandmother had sung to her years before. The necklace that had started their story rested safely where it belonged, not in a display case or a pawn shop, but around the neck of a woman who understood its true value. Some treasures, after all, are worth more than gold. Some journeys take 56 years to complete. And sometimes, when we think we've lost everything, life has a way of bringing us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it most. The necklace had come home, and, with it, a family had finally found its way back to each other. Inger and family all at once. Write down yours, she said. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. Marcus quickly scribbled his number on a piece of paper and handed it to her. Day or night, he said. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. Keisha took the paper and walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind the jewelry store that had just become the most important place in her family's history. As she walked toward home, toward Maya and Mrs. Chun and the simple life they had built together, she felt the weight of possibility and responsibility settling over her shoulders. For the first time in her life, she wasn't walking alone. The jeweler nodded, accepting the weight of her words. I know, he said. I've spent 56 years knowing that my cowardice destroyed lives. I've spent every day since learning about Diana's death trying to figure out how to make amends for something that can never be undone. And now you have the chance, Keisha said. The question is, what are you going to do with it? I can't take your money for this, the jeweler said, his voice firm with conviction. This necklace belongs to your family. It's been kept safe here for 56 years, waiting for you to come home. I'm not going to let you sell your inheritance because you're facing the same crisis your great-grandmother faced. But I need. Keisha started, then stopped. She needed the money desperately. But how could she argue with what he was saying? How could she sell something that had already been sold once in desperation and had found its way back to her through what could only be described as a miracle? I know what you need, the jeweler said gently. And I think I know a way we can solve that problem without you having to give up what's rightfully yours. He turned to his cash register and opened it, pulling out several crisp bills. Consider this a loan against the necklace's value, he said, placing $200 on the counter. When you're back on your feet financially, you can come back and pay me back. The necklace stays with you where it belongs. Keisha stared at the money, then at the man who was offering it to her. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. The jeweler smiled, and for the first time since she had entered the store, his expression seemed completely at peace. Let's just say that I understand what it's like to lose family, he said. And I believe that when you get a chance to help a family stay together, you take it. Something about his voice, about the way he looked at her without judgment, made Keisha feel like she could trust him with her story. She took a deep breath and stepped fully into the store, letting the door close behind her with a decisive click. I need to sell something, she said, the words coming out in a rush. It's a necklace. It belonged to my grandmother, and her grandmother before that. I never thought I would ever. But my daughter needs food, and I don't have anywhere else to turn. The jeweler nodded slowly, his expression serious, but not pitying. Family pieces are always the hardest to part with, he said. But sometimes circumstances leave us no choice. May I see it? With trembling fingers, Keisha reached behind her neck and unclasped the chain. The necklace fell into her palm, the pendant catching the light from the overhead fixtures and throwing tiny rainbows across her skin. For a moment, she just stared at it, this piece of metal that represented everything she was about to lose. Then, she placed it carefully on the velvet-covered counter between them and prepared to say goodbye to the last piece of her grandmother she had left.